What if everything we've been told about autoimmunity is wrong? I'm Elizabeth Yarnell. After awakening partially blind one morning in 1999, a doctor told me my multiple sclerosis would put me in a wheelchair within 10 years. I refused to accept that as the end of the story, so I started investigating. Welcome to the Inflammation Investigator, the podcast that uncovers the inflammation lurking underneath your ailments. Because autoimmune and chronic conditions should not be viewed as death knells when they are actually alarm bells. I'm a traditional naturopath and founder of the Inflammation Academy. And in 2 episodes every week, we dig into what conventional medicine might be missing. If you're living with chronic or unexplained symptoms, this investigation is for you. Your body has been trying to tell you something. Let's start listening.
The most important phrase from the last episode that I hope you remember is that if the plaques that are the scars indicative of multiple sclerosis and other damage from inflammation are not always permanent, as we see in subsequent MRI exams, then MS or another autoimmune condition may not be the life sentence we have been told it is, or we have presumed it to be. In this episode, I want to talk a little bit about scars, specifically scars on my brain. Don't forget, I will be reading. So that's where I'm looking. There is a scar on my lower right back, just above my kidney. It is not very big, maybe the size of a crescent of a silver dollar. It is white and raised and bumpy. I got it when I was 17, sitting on the top of an old covered army carrier that the locals call guaguas in a remote region of the Dominican Republic. I was sitting on the top of the canvas, minding my own business while traveling to the next town over for some shopping, when a load of working men boarded the truck. One climbed up top and lowered himself behind me to sit back to back with our legs dangling over the side, as was the custom. Unfortunately, he had a metal tail comb poking out of his back pocket, and it impaled me and dragged downward as he sat heavily. It was completely unintentional on his part, and my teenage partners cleaned out the wound for me with alcohol and covered it with a bandage when we returned to our volunteer work site. Thankfully, it never got infected, but it did leave a white scar on my olive skin. There's a scar on the tip of my right hand that circles the fingerprint and reminds me of my first cooking/health/business venture at age 14 of making lollipops spiked with vitamin C. I made the lollies, and my younger sister sold them so successfully that soon all lollipops were banned at her middle school. One time, impatient for the molds to cool, I had touched the still hot molten candy with one fingertip. I didn't have a fingerprint at all for at least a year after that. Just a smooth, cheek-like stretch of skin. There is a scar inside my left elbow from where I knocked over a hot urn of coffee at a Thanksgiving dinner long ago. I tore off the cardigan in the immediate aftermath, and the sweater saved me from the brunt of the scalding liquid, though the coffee stain never came out. This scar, too, lacks pigmentation, is slightly raised and about 1 inch long and almost as wide. It's easily visible when I'm in a t-shirt, but I rarely think of it. The scars I think about all the time are the ones you can't see. They are the 17 scars on my brain that show up as white shapes on my MRI scans. The scars that indicate damage to my brain. The scars that record my past and dictate my future. The scars that say I have multiple sclerosis. At the time of my diagnosis, on the eve of my 30th birthday, not knowing if my partial blindness would be permanent, and being told that by my 40th birthday, I would probably be in a wheelchair, I believed so many of my future plans would have to be discarded. If I were being realistic, I would have to face the reality of a future filled with pain, discomfort, or even dysfunction. I could suddenly understand how depression often accompanies chronic illness. What was there to be hopeful for? Shortly after my diagnosis, I began to see specialists. Soon, I was flying across the country to see a neurologist known to be up on all of the latest MS research and clinical trials. This specialist also happened to be working in a city about an hour away from my soon-to-be in-laws. We all decided that my new fiancé would accompany me to the appointment instead of my neurologist father, and we would stay with my future in-laws for the weekend. Newly engaged, I'd only met my fiancé's parents for the first time 1 month or so earlier when I had accompanied him home for the Christmas holiday. At that initial meeting, they had met a confident freelance journalist and successful instructional designer with in-demand multimedia design skills and a waiting list of clients. Now, however, I was in the midst of a serious health crisis, barely working and uncontrollably emotional. 3 weeks of high-dose oral steroids had neither halted nor reversed the optic neuritis in my right eye, but the steroids had packed on an extra 20 pounds on my petite body. I had swelled up 3 dress sizes in a mere month. I felt grotesquely swollen and physically uncomfortable. Even worse, I was suffering from a case of steroid psychosis, an unpleasant side effect of taking steroids. I was teary, short-tempered, generally feeling out of control, and at times, downright crazy. Not particularly the image I wanted to project to either my new in-laws to be, nor to the specialist the A student in me wanted to impress. We went to the doctor's office straight from the airport, and the appointment began with an extensive neurologic assessment. "Stand on 1 foot," the doctor commanded. "Close your eyes and touch your fingers to your nose," followed. He told me to open my eyes and follow his finger with my eyes without moving my head. Then he had me cover my right eye and then my left. I've already told you how this went. It had been 3 weeks since I'd awakened, unable to see some of the print on the pages of my article and unable to actually read it. Now, in that specialist's office, I stared at the wall through my right eye, searching for the eye chart I knew was there because I had just seen it with my left eye. But all I could see was white. Not even a white wall, more like a white cloud of nothing. At the end of the examination, he pointed to the graph on the wall behind him. He traced his finger down the steep, unwavering slope of disability progression. Most people are somewhere up near the upper left corner at the beginning of their MS journey, he explained. The bottom of the slope, terminating in the lower right corner, I came to understand, indicated when my body would fail to the point of shutting down completely. Death from MS complications. And getting to the bottom would be a slow, painful, and frustrating decline, one that was inevitable for everyone diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Looking at that brutal chart, all I could feel was profound horror. He was clear and I appreciated the lack of sugarcoating when he said there was nothing I could do on my own to influence the course of my disease. He was very certain about this. He had followed the cases of thousands of MS patients, had participated in many research efforts and trials of promising drugs. He was a numbers guy. This was all in the numbers, and the numbers were not telling me a hopeful story. He suggested that I might stay up near the top of the chart for a bit longer if I committed to taking one of the 3 disease-modifying therapies that were available at the time. I asked about these disease-modifying therapies, seemingly my only option, and learned they were all delivered via hypodermic needle, and each came with many potential significant side effects of their own. I was already miserable from the side effects of the oral steroids, and the thought of more side effects was daunting. Additionally, I had a lifelong fear of needles, and the mere idea of injecting myself made me begin hyperventilating and progressed to nausea and full-blown panic attack, with my head between my knees and tears streaming down my cheeks. This diagnosis felt like a life sentence of the worst kind. My bright future seemed to figuratively and literally grow dimmer by the minute. I cried for 6 hours after we left the office that day. I simply couldn't stop crying. I'm sure I freaked out my future in-laws who, while gracious and compassionate, didn't quite know what to say to a future daughter-in-law who'd arrived in tears and continued to cry in silent heaves while their second son explained how his future wife was going to become disabled. I was a mess. I crawled into bed and cried myself to sleep. But when I awoke the next day, my first thought was to flatly reject those odds. I simply could not accept that picture of my future. From there, it didn't take long for me to become angry and rebellious. How could they expect me to sit back and passively wait for my body to deteriorate while pinning all my hopes on a drug that more likely than not wouldn't change anything about the course of my disease? That was the worst kind of advice. It robbed me of my agency. It robbed me of hope. I'd always been a glass half full kind of person, and I just couldn't accept the life sentence that MS specialist had levied. Clearly, I would need to search for additional solutions on my own. I became even more dedicated to learning about my condition and my body. Meanwhile, I followed doctor's orders and took the suggested disease-modifying therapy as prescribed. For most of 5 years, I steeled myself against my lifelong fear of needles and injected myself daily, hoping to stave off disability and keep myself near the top of that chart for a little while longer. The downside of the DMT were side effects, and not insignificant ones. Visible tissue damage at the shot sites, a side effect poo-pooed by nurses and doctors as insignificant. Years of painful, itchy hives all over my body every day. And toward the end of this period, seizures immediately following injections. Even worse, I was continuing to experience MS relapses at the pace of more than 1 each year. Taking the medication didn't seem to be slowing the disease progression for me. It was devastating to realize this truth. A few years into my post-diagnosis era, I was still wildly unhappy with the entire situation. I'd been immersed in collecting all the information I could find about MS, but frustrated with the lack of options offered by the conventional medical community. I frequently turned to my father to translate medical speak into layman's terms, and he helped me dissect and understand so much of my situation. Inspired by stories he told of brain injury cases when a patient's brain had healed itself, I realized how little I really knew about how the human body worked, and on a deeper level, how healing worked. I had graduated with a double major in European history and Italian language and literature. For Pete's sake, I never even took an anatomy class in college. I was desperately searching for solutions that could free me from this nightmarish life sentence when I realized a simple fact. I needed more formal learning than I could get from reading books, blogs, or articles, or listening to interviews on the internet. I needed to go back to school. But realistically, I needed to get this knowledge without putting myself into immense debt, uprooting my family to a different city, or not being able to be the mother I wanted to be to my kids. As an already sleep-deprived mother of 2 children under 5 years old, going to a conventional medical school in my late 30s seemed not only an impossible feat, but more and more, one that offered a goal I wasn't interested in. I didn't want to be an MD offering diagnoses, surgeries, and pharmaceuticals. Instead, I wanted to be the wise woman of the tribe, healing gently with herbs and other natural modalities. I began to take classes and weekend workshops in alternative health, hoping to learn whatever I could about the human body and how it functioned. Eventually, I enrolled in Trinity School of Natural Health, first simply to get some certifications, and then, when I became obsessed with the topic, it seemed logical to continue on to become a traditional naturopath trained to facilitate healing using non-pharmaceutical therapies. In the next episode, we'll talk more about how I got to where I am now. Hope to see you then.
And that's another case filed on the Inflammation Investigator. Remember, every symptom is your body's way of communicating. We just need to learn the language. If today's episode sparked something for you, I want to hear about it. Share your own investigation discoveries with me on social media at Elizabeth Yarnell, or find me at elizabethyarnell.com. Your experience could be exactly what another listener needs to hear. And make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. And here's the thing about investigations. They work best when you're not going it alone. If this podcast is helping you uncover the answers you've been searching for, please like, rate, subscribe, and review, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. As a new podcast, these actions mean more than you know. Want to dive deeper into your own inflammation investigation? Head over to inflammationinvestigator.com, where you can take my free inflammation quiz to uncover which hidden triggers might be affecting your health. Until next time, this is Elizabeth Yarnell, your inflammation investigator, reminding you that the solutions to your health issues are out there. Let's find them together.